At the pinnacle of his empire, Alexander the Great kept hearing of a strange figure in Greece. Not a rival general, not a king, but a beggar philosopher named Diogenes. He owned nothing. He slept in a barrel. He begged for food, and yet his name carried farther than most kings. By day, he would walk the marketplace holding a lit lamp against the sun. When asked why, he said, "I am searching for an honest man." At night, he was seen rolling his barrel up and down the streets, mocking the restless chase of human ambition. One time he threw away his drinking cup after seeing a boy sip water with his hands. "Even a child," he said, "lives with fewer needs than me." Intrigued, Alexander came to meet him. The conqueror arrived draped in gold and armor, surrounded by soldiers, advisors, and horses. Diogenes lay half-naked in the sunlight, yawning, barely turning his head as the king approached. Alexander asked, "Tell me, philosopher, what is it you want?" Diogenes squinted, raised a hand, and said, "Yes, step aside. You are blocking my sun." The crowd froze. Never had anyone spoken to Alexander that way. But the king smiled and whispered, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Diogenes replied, "If I were not Diogenes, I would still wish to be Diogenes." The king had the world in his hands, but in that moment, everyone knew Diogenes already had something greater, the freedom to want nothing at all. Genghis Khan sent his daughters to rule, not as ornaments, not as brides, but as weapons. When he offered a princess to a foreign king, it came with terms that could not be refused. The king had to dismiss his wives, swear loyalty to the Khan, and take his new bride as his only queen. Then, Genghis would summon his new son-in-law to the front lines, to die in his wars. And when he did, the daughter inherited his kingdom. Each widow ruled in her father's name, their lands forming a living fortress around the Mongol heartland. Historians talk about his army, his horses, his generals, but they forget the women who outplayed empires. An African queen once defeated Rome. Her name was Amanirenas. When Egypt fell to Augustus Caesar, Rome thought Nubia would fall next. They sent armies south. They expected surrender. Instead, Amanirenas rode out herself, a warrior queen, blind in one eye from battle, but sharper than any general Rome had ever faced. She struck first. Her soldiers stormed Roman forts. They captured statues of Augustus and one bronze head she ordered buried beneath a temple gate. Every day, her people walked over the emperor's face. Rome retaliated with fire and steel. Villages burned. Her own son was killed in the fighting. But Amanirenas did not yield. For years she battled, the greatest empire on earth, until finally, Rome did something it almost never did. They signed a peace treaty, and that treaty kept Nubia free, one of the only kingdoms in history that Rome could never conquer. The most powerful woman in the ancient world was betrayed by her 10-year-old husband and brother. It's 51 BC. Alexandria is buzzing. She's just 18. Her brother, only 10. But in Egypt, that's your king and queen. And yes, they're married. At first, it works. She's brilliant, charismatic, speaks 9 languages. He just follows her lead. But power is poison. And baby brother, he wants it all. He spreads lies, cuts off her allies. Then, he kicks her out of her own kingdom. Big mistake. She sets camp outside the city walls, rallies an army, gains favor with Julius Caesar. And then, one night, she smuggles herself back into Alexandria, rolled up inside a carpet. By sunrise, her brother's dead, found floating in the Nile. No one really knows how, but everyone knew who ruled Egypt now. Cleopatra, the queen who rewrote power itself. She was the most dangerous woman in Rome. She slept in the same bed as her son, and, oh, she married him. Twice. Agrippina the Younger, sister of Caligula, mother of Nero. The woman who turned seduction into a weapon. When her husband, the emperor Claudius, mysteriously died after a meal she prepared, she wasted no time. Her teenage son Nero became emperor, and she became the true ruler of Rome. Image's Nero wasn't just his mother. She was his partner, in everything. Whispers in the palace said they shared more than political power. They shared a bed. And when Nero tried to distance himself, she found a shocking way to keep control, marrying him twice. But power makes people paranoid. Nero decided she was too dangerous to live. He tried to poison her. It didn't work. He collapsed a ceiling over her. She survived. Finally, he sent assassins to stab her to death. Her last words, "Strike my womb, the place that bore such a monster." And just like that, Rome lost its most dangerous queen.
Here's something crazy most people don't know about Cleopatra.
She wasn't Egyptian. She was Greek. And despite all the legends, she didn't win her crown through conquest. She inherited it, co-ruling Egypt with her 10-year-old brother. But the nobles hated her. They forced her out of her own palace. So, what does Cleopatra do? She sneaks back, not with an army, but wrapped inside a rug. When the carpet unrolled before Julius Caesar, there she was, smiling up at Rome's most powerful man. He fought her war. He made her queen again. But when Caesar was murdered, she didn't fall. She adapted. She seduced his top general, Mark Antony, trying to tie Egypt's future to Rome's next power. It worked for a while, until Octavian, Caesar's heir, crushed them both. Cleopatra didn't die a warrior queen. She died cornered, letting a snake's bite write her final act.
Here's something weird most people don't know.
The Mongols, the most unstoppable empire in history, never conquered Africa. Not a single part of it. They burned cities in China, Persia, even Europe. But when it came to Africa, they just stopped. And it wasn't because they didn't try. When they reached Egypt in 1260, they met the Mamluks, warriors trained in the same steppe tactics as the Mongols. Basically, Africa said, "Nice horses, we invented that." The Mamluks beat them so hard at the Battle of Ain Jalut, the Mongols never came back. First L in their history, and it was on African soil. But even if they had won, the Sahara was waiting. Thousands of miles of heat and nothingness. No grass for horses. No rivers for men. The desert itself was unconquerable. Imagine a priest so infamous, his sins filled an entire courtroom. Not rumors, not whispers, numbers. Cold, impossible numbers. Trancoso, Portugal. The year is 1487. A Franciscan friar, Father Francisco da Costa, 62 years old, stands trial before horrified judges. The charges? Not theft, not heresy, but seduction, incest, exploitation. The verdict listed them one by one, like a grim tally. 53 women, nearly 300 children, 299 lives, traced back to a single man of the cloth, his own sisters, the daughters of his godparents, maids, slaves, even his mother and his aunt. The sentence was as brutal as his crimes, to be chained, dragged through the streets, dismembered, and scattered across the city as a warning. But then, the twist. King Juan II intervened, not to condemn him further, but to save him, because in the king's eyes, this was not a scandal. He didn't pardon the friar because he was innocent. He pardoned him because he thought the priest had done the kingdom a favor by helping to populate the empty lands of Beira Alta. And so, the priest who should have been torn apart by horses walked the earth as a free man. This African queen once sat on a servant's back to face the Portuguese. It was 1622, Angola. Two sides met to negotiate peace. The Portuguese came with titles, robes, and arrogance. They gave themselves chairs, but left none for her. Nzinga didn't flinch. She glanced at her servant. He knelt, and she sat, and looked them dead in the eye. That day the Portuguese learned, this woman kneels to no one. Queen Nzinga fought on her terms. She forged alliances, outwitted slavers, and turned enemies into pawns. Europe saw her as a threat. Her people saw her as a shield. Her throne wasn't built on gold. It was built on defiance. and on the spine of a woman who refused to bow. This African country lost almost 1 million people in just 100 days. All it took was a radio station. In Rwanda, 1994, the airwaves didn't just carry music, they carried a death list. It called itself RTLM. It played jokes, music, football commentary. Harmless, right? Wrong. Between the laughs and pop songs were seeds of hate. Day by day, the insults sharpened. Certain groups mocked, labeled as enemies. The audience grew, so did the venom. Then, April 6th, the president's plane was shot down, and the mask came off. The laughter on the radio turned into instructions, names, addresses, street-by-street directions. Ordinary citizens were told exactly where and how to kill. In 100 days, over 800,000 people were dead. Friends turned on friends. RTLM remains one of history's deadliest propaganda machines. And all it took was a radio station. The most loyal soldier in a Polish unit during World War II wasn't a man, it was a bear. His name was Wojtek, the happy warrior. In 1942, soldiers passing through Iran bought him from a boy in the mountains. He was just a cub, wide-eyed, playful. At first he was a mascot, but soon he became family. He learned to drink beer straight from the bottle. He puffed on cigarettes, sometimes swallowing them whole. And his favorite game? Wrestling with the men. But Wojtek wasn't just comic relief. When the Polish army marched toward Monte Cassino in 1944, they refused to leave him behind, so they gave him a rank and a paycheck, officially enlisted as a soldier. Under enemy fire, this bear did the impossible. He stood on 2 legs, carrying crates of ammunition, hundreds of pounds at a time, never dropping a single shell. Thanks to him, the supply lines never broke. The soldiers won the day, and Wojtek marched on with them as a comrade in arms. After the war, he lived out his days in the Edinburgh Zoo. Veterans who visited would toss him his old favorites, bottles of beer, and the occasional cigarette. He died in 1963. But to this day, Wojtek is remembered not just as a mascot, but as a soldier, the bear who fought in World War II. Imagine fearing death so much that you tried to erase it from history. One man did. He was not a priest, not a philosopher, but an emperor who ruled millions with an iron hand. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, the man who united kingdoms, raised the Great Wall, and built an underground army of stone to guard him forever. But power wasn't enough. He wanted eternity. He sent fleets across oceans, searching for magic islands. He forced alchemists to brew potions of immortality, and in the end, he swallowed them himself. They were made of mercury. The elixir of life became the poison of death. When he finally died, his tomb was sealed. Inside, palaces, treasures, and rivers of liquid mercury flowing through the earth. An empire in the afterlife, built by a man who tried to escape death, but couldn't. Imagine a man so filthy he almost never bathed, so uneducated he couldn't read, yet his shadow reached the throne of Russia. The empire was crumbling. Soldiers dying in war, revolution whispering in the streets, and in the palace, panic. The Tsar's only heir was bleeding to death from a disease no doctor could cure. Then came a peasant from Siberia, wild eyes, torn robes. He touched the boy's hand, prayed, and the bleeding slowed. When the empress met him, she said,
"You're a holy man."
Doors opened, ministers bowed. A beggar became the voice behind the throne, but the higher he rose, the darker the whispers, that he was corrupting the crown, that he was the devil in disguise, so they plotted his death. At a midnight feast, he swallowed poisoned cakes and wine. He laughed. Bullets followed. He staggered, still alive. Finally, his body was dragged to the icy Neva River, where the water did what poison and bullets could not. His name? Grigory Rasputin, the peasant who terrified Russia.
You've heard of Rome, you've heard of Athens, but Timbuktu? They never told you about that one. In the heart of West Africa, surrounded by nothing but desert, rose a city so rich that gold dust was used like pocket change. Timbuktu wasn't just wealthy, it was wise. At its peak, it had over 180 schools and libraries. Students came from Morocco, Cairo, even Europe, to learn math, medicine, and philosophy. Thousands of ancient manuscripts were written and preserved here, texts that rival anything in ancient Greece or Persia. Why was it so rich? One word: trade. Timbuktu sat at the crossroads of gold, salt, and knowledge. Caravans traveled for months just to trade in its markets. For centuries, Europeans thought Timbuktu was a myth, a city of pure gold hidden in the desert. When they finally found it, they were too late. Colonial conquest, war, and time buried its greatness. But Timbuktu was real, and it was brilliant. So next time someone says Africa had no history, tell them about Timbuktu.
History usually begins in Egypt or in Greece, but the true beginning was somewhere older, much older. 5,000 years ago, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, a people built something the world had never seen before: civilization itself. The Sumerians. They raised the first cities out of mud brick and stone. They invented writing, pressing cuneiform into clay tablets, so thoughts could outlive their writers. They built schools. They made laws. They even invented taxes. Our clocks and compasses still echo their math. 60 seconds in a minute. It all began with them. They mapped the night sky with precision, charting planets like Jupiter and Venus, when others saw only wandering stars. Their epics, carved into stone, told of Gilgamesh, the oldest written story in human history. And yet, among their carvings lies a mystery, a god etched into stone, wearing a band on the wrist, its details so precise, it almost feels impossible. So how do we remember them? Barely at all. The Sumerians, the people who invented civilization, and the first civilization, the world forgot. Why is Africa poor when it sits on the richest land in the world? It holds 40% of the world's gold reserves, half of all diamonds, and nearly all of the planet's chromium, platinum, and cobalt. It has a third of the world's uranium, aluminum, and graphite, 12% of global oil, and 65% of the world's farmland. And yet, its people remain among the poorest. Why? The reason is simple. The land is African, but the control is not. Foreign companies lease the farms and the mines. They take the raw materials away. They refine the metals, smelt the ore, process the oil, and then sell it back to Africa at 10 times the price. The continent is rich in resources but lacks leadership, infrastructure, and factories to process its own riches. The soil is African, the minerals are African, but the wealth belongs elsewhere. Until Africa owns not just the ground beneath its feet, but the means to shape it, we will remain poor on the richest continent in the world.
The CIA didn't just want Congo's diamonds, they wanted the whole vault. 1960, Congo finally breaks free from Belgium. The chains are gone, but the hands holding the keys, still foreign. Out of the chaos steps one man, Patrice Lumumba, young, fearless. He talks about unity, hospitals, schools, an Africa that stands on its own feet. For millions, he's hope. For the West, he's a problem, because Congo isn't just any patch of land. It's a gold mine sitting on copper, cobalt, uranium, the very metals that powered the Cold War. Then Lumumba makes one move that changes everything. He looks to Moscow for help. Suddenly, Washington loses its calm. The CIA starts whispering, "Democracy's great, unless it messes with our business." So they move fast. January 1961, Lumumba is overthrown, handed to his enemies, and silenced. The dream dies before it ever lives. In his place rises Mobutu, backed, funded, and polished by Western hands. He rules for decades while Congo bleeds wealth, while its people sink deeper into poverty. What could have been Africa's richest nation was turned into one of its most broken.
So, Jeff Bezos who? Like, for real, my dude, your little online bookstore is cute, but I'm literally walking through gold.
In 1579, a giant black man stepped into Japan and broke the country's mind. He was over 6 feet tall, muscular, and his skin so dark people thought he was dipped in ink. They even tried to scrub it off. His name was Yasuke, an African brought to Japan by Portuguese missionaries. But what happened next? Nobody expected. Oda Nobunaga, one of Japan's most powerful warlords, didn't just tolerate Yasuke, he was fascinated. He gave him land, a house, and a katana. Within months, Yasuke wasn't just a guest, he became a samurai, the first foreigner ever to hold that title. He fought beside Nobunaga in brutal battles, swords clashing, arrows flying, a black warrior standing tall in feudal Japan. Then, tragedy. Nobunaga was betrayed and forced to commit suicide. Yasuke fought to the end, refusing to run. He was taken prisoner and vanished from history. To this day, Yasuke is remembered not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of honor, loyalty, and defiance.